not in favor of Donald Trump, and then he'll have to appeal to the Supreme Court. But the point is, we know that Donald Trump uses shady business practices. Everybody knows that. And so we've got a real issue. Now, Tim Scott announced he's going to withdraw. And if you remember, I think we talked about this. I certainly did it on my podcast. Tim Scott wasn't going anywhere anyway. But think about this. That leaves Ramaswamy, who to me is just a disgrace. No, he's not going to be the nominee now, and I hope not ever. You've got Chris Christie, who is a very bright guy, but is on the wrong side of Donald Trump and Donald Trump's base, so he can't win the nomination.
True.
You got Nikki Haley, who now has everything going for her because she will win the South Carolina primary, unless, as I believe, Donald Trump beats her there too. And then, of course, there is Ron DeSantis, who I think hasn't got a chance of a snowball in hell, which leaves the Republican Party with Donald Trump. And what are they going to do if Donald Trump is convicted? By the way, let me make my position clear. I'm in favor of that trial being put on all the television screens of America. I lived through Watergate. I know what it means when you have public exposure. And I talked with a very dear friend of mine who is sort of a Trump defender who said, well, you know, I was watching on election night and Trump was ahead until all of a sudden he wasn't, the suspicion being that something nefarious was done. And then, of course, those people on January 6th who are now in jail, they deserve to be in jail, I said. Well, the point of this is that we need a public trial so that the American people can see that what Trump did was so seditious. But wait, I then said to my interlocutor, I said, but if you're right, I'll go on the air and publicly apologize to you, but you have to do the same. And you know what you said earlier, Beowulf, is right. People are locked into positions. And frankly, don't confuse people with the facts. I'm not sure the truth matters.
It's interesting, though, because at critical points in our history, and I certainly can think of Watergate. I can think of the Army hearings back in the 1950s with Army McCarthy hearings and Joe McCarthy. I forget whether they were televised or not.
They were.
Those ones were. I was thinking of the even earlier one with General MacArthur and the hearings.
Well, that was not telecast.
That was not.
There was no television really in those days.
Right. That would have been, 1950, 1951. But the fact that there were hearings that were public, that were reported on, and the way in which, of all people, one of the few, I think, positive things that came out of the career of Richard Russell was the fact that he exposed publicly in a way that the public could process, even if it was mediated and not through television, that his ideas about what to do in the Korean War were just not very wise and not very, very smart, and perhaps prevented a dictatorship from happening in this country because General MacArthur was very, very popular. I think at certain points in our history, airing things out like that, especially on television, has done a tremendous service to the public in which you again and again put this message forward, even atmospherically. And if you have the right combination of personalities, you can see that this is not the way that we want to go. And you can see through repeated exposure to a personality like Trump under those controlled circumstances of a courtroom, brought and forced to bring the truth before him and forced to have facts put against him, and not just free reigning, as he does so often in his speeches, can be very productive. And I think that could possibly change some minds, because there are so few instances in which Trump is seen in that kind of a situation. He is almost rarely, the facts are almost never brought before him. He is rarely forced to confront anything. And I think if that were done night after night, day after day, that would be a very positive thing. So I completely agree with you. I think this trial and all the subsequent trials should be televised, because he would be forced to confront the law and forced to confront the truth.
The Georgia trials will be. Question is about a federal trial, because the federal courts have not done that. By the way, let me just point out, MacArthur, although not on television or radio during his testimony, his testimony destroyed any chance he would have had to become president of the United States.
Yeah.
And in 52, he keynoted the Republican National Convention. And he thought it might elevate him to the nomination. But of course, he revealed himself. And that's my hope.
Yes.
That Donald Trump will reveal himself by being on the stand.
Yeah.
That has to be our hope.
You put it much more concisely than I do, and I appreciate that. That's absolutely right. Trump must be made to reveal himself in a way that he cannot control.
Right. Let me also say a word about Trump and his choice for vice president. Mm-hmm. He indicated Kari Lake of Arizona, who is frankly less than desirable, would be appalling, and Tucker Carlson from the media, who would be an absolute unmitigated disaster.
Is it not hilarious, John, how much a creature of the media Donald Trump continues to be? He really frames his presidency or proto-presidency or campaign still in terms of what is going to get me the biggest ratings, who are the biggest stars, and he's not really thinking about politics. He's thinking of, in both cases, two former television stars who have never held political office.
Tim Scott, and let me point out that Senator Scott never attacked Donald Trump during this entire campaign. Mm-hmm. Tim Scott is an evangelical, and there is no question but that Donald Trump needs to retain the evangelical base. Mm-hmm. That was the main reason Mike Pence went on the ticket in 2016, rather.
Right.
And so I think that you got to take a real look at Tim Scott. And when he was asked this morning whether or not he was thinking about the vice presidency, of course, he declined to do that or say anything. But I'm going to say to you, that would be an interesting ticket. Now, there is another question that was posed to me that I want to answer with you. What happens if the Republicans nominate Trump, but he's convicted?
Right.
What happens?
Right.
And the answer is that he would not necessarily have to give up the nomination. Mm. But were he to give up the nomination, once the convention is adjourned, the process was established really by the Democrats in 1972 when Eagleton resigned as the vice presidential candidate, and the National Committee made the selection. That would be what would happen here. If the convention is not meeting, it means the National Committee is the authoritative voice of the Republican Party. And in that case, that puts Ronna Romney McDaniel on the spot. And if you listen to her on CNN this weekend, that's not a spot she wants to be in, nor should she be in it. So the Republicans have got a real challenge, not only because of the Donald Trump controversy, but because they've got a problem holding on to the House. They've got a problem holding on to the Senate, if they can get it. They've got so many issues because, do you remember, Bailiff, and most people don't, there was no Republican platform in 2020.
That's right.
They simply said, whatever Donald Trump wants, any political party.
Le platform, c'est moi, says Donald Trump.
It's terrible. Any political party that would cede itself to an individual has no right to lead the American people.
Yeah. Well, that's because, really, to a large extent, their platform is Donald Trump and whatever he's going to happen to come up with. And that's very dangerous. And that's why you want to avoid demagogues, because they don't have platforms. It is
Unless they're radio talk show hosts, in which case
that's even more dangerous.
It's not necessarily a bad thing. All right.
I've worked with you as a radio talk show host, but many other radio talk show hosts whom it would be very dangerous to have as public officials in any way, shape, or form.
I feel that way about Tucker Carlson.
Yes.
I feel that way about Kari Lake.
Absolutely.
And there's something that our listeners should know. Candidates for president have the right, theoretically, to name their own running mate. Mm-hmm. And in most cases, that was the case. The exception in recent times was John McCain, who wanted Joe Lieberman as his running mate. And McCain, in the end, couldn't take Lieberman because Lieberman was pro-choice and the Republican Party was not pro-choice. And one can only speculate, and I love historical ifs, if it had been a McCain-Lieberman ticket, might not have been more competitive. And certainly John McCain expressed toward the end of his life his great regret at not having stuck to his guns. But a Republican convention wouldn't nominate somebody who was pro-life back rather pro-choice
Yeah.
back in 2008. So, all right, I know you had more subjects. I don't want to run out of time. Go ahead.
I think we have actually hit just about everything, but I did want to mention in terms of wonderful historical ifs for those students of history and the Constitution in the audience. I think about, like, what if we were in a situation, and I heard somebody mention this on a podcast that I was listening to the other day, the original system whereby it was just the Electoral College, and whoever came second in the Electoral College became vice president. I was thinking, well, wouldn't it be interesting to have Joe Biden as president and then Donald Trump as vice president? That would be a very interesting historical what if.
May I say, it is always a high honor and great personal privilege to be with you.
Indeed, sir, and well spoken. John Rothmann, he is the host of Around the Political World with John Rothmann. Please check it out. It is just 10 minutes of your time every Monday through Friday, in addition to a couple of longer drops on the feed, including my own, and also that of the great Mark Thompson, whose program you appear on regularly. My best to him. And thank you so much, John, for bringing us your wisdom and, again, a November cornucopia of knowledge to Facepalm America. All the best to you, sir.
Thank you.
Up next, we're going to be talking about affordable housing. Is it something that exists in California? Not for too many. This is Facepalm America. I'm Beowulf Rockland. Facepalm America, I'm Beowulf Rockland. FacepalmAmerica.com is where you can go for more information. Do you live in California? You might not. Maybe you just dream of living in California. Or maybe you thank God you got out of California. I know there are folks in both categories still. But not many people in California can afford a home there, can afford to own a home. In fact, only 15% of Californians can, according to new data. 15% of California households can afford to buy a home, at least during the third quarter of 2023, according to new figures released by the California Association of Realtors. The new figures represent the lowest home affordability rate since 2007, a news release said. 15%. It's almost like, the upper class. Yeah, people draw funny lines as to where the upper class is because nobody likes to think of themselves as upper class. Millionaires routinely these days refer to themselves as, members of the middle class, and it gets a little bit silly. But, then on the other hand, when you understand how ridiculously expensive it costs to live in California, per this story, you think, well, maybe that's not entirely unreasonable. And the real estate situation in California certainly is not. And let me state, beyond just stating, why, there's a problem here. There's a problem. Problems are bad. Liberal podcast. Oh, problems bad. Beyond that, we should do something about it. There should be things like rent control in California. Oh, I know. Socialism. Ooh. But in order for people to live, more people should be able to afford homes than that. And frankly, at this point, I'm worried more about late-stage capitalism than I am about socialism. If people can't live, people can't live. The latest figures show that California's housing affordability rates continue to decrease. In the second quarter of 2023, it was 16% of Californians that could afford a home. For comparison, about 56% of California home buyers could afford a home during the first quarter of 2012. 56, 11 years ago, 15 now. That's nuts. We need to crack down on this industry. The government needs to come in